Good afternoon. As the Provost of the University, I would like to welcome you all to this momentous intellectual occasion. On behalf of the Boğaziçi University community and our co-organizers of this event, Istanbul Şehir University, the Italian Institute of Culture, the Italian Consulate General, and the Italian Embassy, I'd like to thank you all for being here. On our 150th anniversary, we feel very honored and privileged to be hosting this event and sharing it with the public at large. There are times when introduction speeches are not really needed, or they may be redundant. And I believe that this is one such occasion. Whatever one may try to say about the significance of the event or the significance and contributions of the individuals, it is bound to fail miserably. So I'm not going to do that. We will have the rare chance today to listen to two renowned authors, two great minds and intellect engaged in conversation. Before introducing our guest, I would like to make a very brief and mundane announcement. I will ask our friends from press to limit their photographing with flashes once the guests arrive on stage, and I would ask them kindly to be seated in the areas reserved for them. Bir basındaki arkadaşlarımızdan rica edeceğim, konuşmalar başladıktan sonra ne olur kendilerine ayrılan bölgede, şu alanda ya da arka tarafa geçebilir. Oradan flashsız fotoğraf çekmelerini rica edeceğiz. So, let me briefly introduce our guests. Professor Umberto Eco, Emeritus Professor of Semiotics at Bologna University, has written several novels as well as non-fiction works on topics ranging from aesthetics, mass media, and anthropology, and has received more than 24 awards for his work and contributions. Orhan Pamuk, a Nobel Prize winner, is a prominent novelist of Istanbul and the world. He also teaches at Columbia. I might also add that he received an honorary doctorate from Boğaziçi University in this very room a couple of years ago. Our moderator today is Professor Patrizia Violi, full professor of semiotics at Bologna University Department of Communications. We thank them all, and I'd like to invite them to the stage, please.
Facilitate a dialogue, which I think would be indeed very easy. But anyway, it's a big honor, and it's a difficult task too. I am very aware that you are all here to hear them and not me, so I promise I will do it. The two persons we have here are so well famous and so important as international, and I think they are among the most important contemporary writers and intellectuals in all over the world, that a dialogue between them is in itself, will be in itself a very relevant and important and self-evident event. However, I believe there is also something more, kind of some hidden reasons why this dialogue is relevant and why Orhan Pamuk and Umberto Eco should really talk together tonight. And I think something they share, which has a lot to do with the topic of today's talk, which is facts, fiction, and history. And in my opinion, their common ground lies in the way they both share to look at the relationship between the worlds of fiction and reality. And for both, I think the fictional world of a novel is in a way more substantial than real life. They will probably use different words to describe the same thing. I have the feeling that Orhan Pamuk would probably use the word authenticity, while Umberto Eco would rather use truth. Umberto Eco wrote a lot of articles on truth and fiction, and he has claimed in this article that precisely because a novel is an imaginary story that did not take place in the reality, then the statement, if a novel, are much more true than the historical real facts. That Anna Karenina committed suicide is something more incontestably true than the fact that, Hitler committed suicide. We can always discover, according to Umberto Eco, that some historian find out a new document, and it's found out that Hitler did not commit suicide and managed to escape to South America, while Anna is forever, without possibility of redemption, condemned to her tragic fate. By the way, it's interesting enough that for both Eco and Pamuk, the way the metaphor they use to describe this specific intensity and reality of fictional world is the same. It's the same metaphor, and it's the metaphor of a child at play. I don't know if they have copied each other, I don't think so, but both of them, they say that in reality the work of the novelist parallel what a child does when using the fictional past sense, says I was a princess and you were a king. However, in order to convince you that these two writers have really something in common, I will take a different, somehow anomalous point of view, which might seem bizarre at first sight, but I hope it will turn out relevant. And my starting point will be they shared love for a particular discursive representative device, which is the list. List of objects in particular, and the list of objects have a lot to do with ekphrasis. Ekphrasis in its more restricted way, sense is just a description of a work of art, but in a more wider sense is the rhetorical figure that is more capable to produce reality effect. And that opens an interesting question, which is a question about realism, which we might address later in the dialogue. Are these two writers realist or not? Well, we'll see. Eco in his novels includes innumerable lists of objects, of many different things. In the Foucault pendulum, there are endless, sometimes a bit long list of Masonic lodges, of occultist societies, of alchemic elements in the island of the day before, for the people who read it. There are lists of objects in the vessel. I keep it short because I don't want to make a list of lists. Pamuk, in his book Istanbul, devotes numerous pages to list of different things, objects in his own home, people, collection of weird stories. There is a full chapter, you certainly know, about an immense encyclopedia of Reşat Ekrem Koçu.
Reşat Ekrem Koçu.
I did quite right. And which is interesting because it could be really a kind of a visual representation of a theoretical concept Umberto Eco developed in a lot of his book, which is the idea of encyclopedia, theoretical notion.
But Eco indeed went even further, because he actually devoted a whole book to the idea of list. A book that in Italian had the title Vertigine della lista, the vertigo of the list. Why vertigo? Why should a list be so vertiginous? And what is a list? Well, a list, of course, is a register, is a catalogue of different things, and the list is therefore a form of categorization that helps to categorize and put together different objects or items within the same category. And then, of course, it becomes very interesting to see what the categories we list our object under. At the first sight, it might appear to be sometimes an obsessive device to impose an order in the inherent variability of the world. But things are more complicated than that, because we start, at least in principle, open-ended, and they are not circumscribed within a given specific clause form. And indeed, the English title of this book is not the vertigo of the list, it is the infinity of lists. A list can always be extended because you can always add a new item, and this is why, according to Eco, the list suggests the ever-open idea of infinite, which is the vertiginous aspect and connotation. In the book of list, Eco also shows us example of Wunderkammer, those cabinets of curiosities of the 17th century, which are generally considered the origin of contemporary museum, and that comes out in the Museum of Innocence too, which in a way is also visually a strange Wunderkammer. So that's another possible...
Please tell them it's real, they can go.
You can go. We have to go because, as far as I understand, the museum will be supported by Argentine people
Yes.
going. So it's important to go, and it's also a wonderful and very intense, emotionally intense experience. But I will come back in a second why it's so emotional. Now, this suggests, this reciprocal love for list suggests to me a different question, maybe a bit bizarre, but are lists also collections? Well, I thought about it, but my answer at the end is no. And I think the reason why lists are not collection has a lot to do with the writing and the mystery of being a novelist, but I'll come back to that. A list can be similar to a collection, but it's different because a collection always aims at a definite, closed form. The ideal collection is the collection that is able to assemble all the items of a given series, closing the series. For example, maybe in Turkey it was popular, I think I saw in the Museum of Innocence, it was popular in Italy, for kids to make a collection of picture cards, trading cards. And the point was to close the series, to get all the items of the series. So the ideal collection is a closed form that allows a total control of some given world, although a very restricted world as cards. That's why a real collector is animated by a passion of possession. He wants to gather objects, not that much for the pleasure of that the object might give him, and I think not necessarily because of the intrinsic value of the object. That would be more kind of what an investor might do. No, the pleasure of the collection or the collector lies elsewhere in the fact of actually possessing them and hopefully possessing the whole series. I think Don Juan is a very good example of a very optimistic collector because he cannot realistically hope to reach the entire set of existing women, but the pleasure for him, as we well know, is il piacere di porle in lista, the pleasure to put them in a list. Are Eco and Pamuk collectors? Well, I can give you I can tell you half a secret. Eco indeed does collect something. He collects ancient books, and he has a very beautiful and also maybe valuable collection that he acquired over many years. However, I'm going to tell you then a more less known secret. He has a very, very bad habit because he reads the book he collects. Even worse, he actually collects the book because he's interested in what is written in the book. He collects the book on topics that are close to him, that he studied, that he's interested. And I don't think a real collector should ever love the content of what he collects. I know Orhan Pamuk too little to know if he's a collector, and I can only guess from his work. And of course, I'm referring here to the Museum of Innocence, the entire operation, the novel, the museum, and the catalogue. Well, judging from that, of course, all this is in a way about collecting. So that could induce the idea that Orhan Pamuk is indeed a collector and one of the
But
world's
Patricia, I can write about collectors, but I may not be a collector myself. What about that?
I know. I'm just that's a rhetorical. He might look like one of the worst pieces of collector, but he's not. And I'm going to tell you why I don't think he's not. What does it mean to collect, and what is a collector? Well, the action of collecting is based on an extremely realistic attitude towards the world. Through possession of objects, we can control reality, and therefore the objects have to be authentic. They have to be the real thing. Otherwise, there is no point in collecting things that are not authentic in this realistic way. But in the real Museum of Innocence, there are objects that have been constructed ad hoc. Because Pamuk wanted to find some object, he could not find them in the real world.
But that was private information.
No, you wrote there somewhere. I'm sure I knew even before he did. So he needed something to create or recreate or make real this fictional world, and he made it. So the ontological status of this manufactured object is rather interesting because, especially if you think of the topic of the day, facts, fiction, and history, because these objects are, in a way, imaginary real objects, or if you prefer, real imaginary objects. Works both ways. But if you actually create your own objects, you are no longer a collector, since a real collector needs to find out in the world ready-made things that he discovered together. By the way, I'm using here the masculine pronouns because I believe that at the end of the story of a collector is always a masculine story, that's the only one I suggest. So if the objects are not authentic in that realistic sense, then from the point of view of a collector, they no longer possess any value. Another case why I think Orhan Pamuk is not a collector is that sometimes he really made up his object, and sometimes he found the object, and from that object a story started, or an episode started, or a character maybe started that he did not think of before. So that's exactly the opposite of the collector. For the collector, the objects are the end, the conclusion of the story, while for the looker, were very often were the starting point of his story. So the object collected in the Museum of Innocence do not authenticate reality and history. They authenticate the fictional world. They have contributed to constructing, or sometimes that originated from them, as Pamuk secretly told me. We begin here to sense a hint regarding what the role of object might be in the Museum of Innocence, which I will convince you is not that far from the role of list of objects in Umberto's Eco's novel. If you now turn to Kemal, the main character of Pamuk's novel, from
very beginning of his story, he declares why objects are so important. When we can point to a given moment in our life and say that that was the happiest moment of our life, and that is precisely the beginning of the novel, that happiness has already gone, of course, and we know it now belongs to the past, and we never come back. And the awareness that we know which was the happiest moment is extremely painful for the right reason. For Kemal, the only way that makes the pain bearable are the objects that conserve the memory of that very moment, and objects that are more faithful to our experience of happiness than real people can tell as us. Objects are like embodied memory supports that help us remember through our own senses. I emphasize that because I think that senses are very important, both for Kemal, I guess for Pamuk, certainly for a person who reads the book and visits the Museum of Innocence. And they console us in a way. The authenticity of the object collected by Kemal Pamuk derives precisely from this. It lies not in the belonging to the real world, but rather in the capacity to reconstruct a world. As Pamuk writes in his the Norton lecture, which has been published as Green Sentimental Novelist, I'm quoting, the sounds, smell, and images of the world we encounter in novels evoke a sensation of authenticity we fail to find in life itself. However, this feeling of authenticity, and it's something that Pamuk points out very clearly, gives us a sense of disappointment, us readers, of course, because we know that the wonderful world Okay, I can, if that is make it shorter, was that a request to make it shorter? I want them to, okay, I will skip something, and I will say that we can understand at this point why the Museum of Innocence is called Innocence. The story is not an innocent story in a way, but the objects are, and indeed the title is called The Innocence of Object. Orhan Pamuk said that he made this museum for his own pleasure and happiness. Well, I think he made the museum also for our own happiness as reader, because we can really fill the gap which is in between fictional world and reality. Umberto, what is probably supposed to be a biographic novel, which is The Mysterious Flame of Queen Loana, confronts in a way with the same duplicity of memory, which is the individual memory of a single individual, like Kemal's story, but also the collective memory that the Museum of Innocence tells us, which is the story of a city, of a generation, of a collectivity. And in Umberto Eco's story, there is the main character who lost his memory, his individual memory, but he kept the encyclopedic and general memory of all his sculptures, worlds. And in that book there are a lot of objects that the main character found out in the house of his childhood, which are very close in a way to the object collected in the Museum of Innocence. So that's another common point. So to conclude, I think that neither Umberto Eco nor Orhan Pamuk are collectors. I think the collectors challenges the flow of time, trying to possess things on the plan of reality, And the novelist, especially analytical sentimental, I think both of them are, knows that the only way to oppose time and religion is to make an imaginary world real by way of words, inventing and constructing stories. So I will stop now, and maybe the first question would be exactly starting from this naive and sentimental reader and the novelist, that the lapsus is not a chance. Orhan Pamuk wrote about a naive sentimental novelist. Umberto wrote in many of his writing, and especially the last one, which is Confession of a Young Novelist, about semantic and aesthetic writer. So, should we start? You stress more the naive and sentimental writer, and I think Umberto stress more the semantic and aesthetic reader. So, should we start from here?
You're suggesting that we are referring to the same thing. I agree, perhaps. But my title, first, thank you for giving me an opportunity to advertise my book, the least selling book in Turkish, The Naive and Sentimental Novelist. Of course, this is based on Friedrich Schiller's famous essay on poetry. Friedrich Schiller makes a distinction between, in his essay, a long essay, according to Thomas Mann, the greatest essay in German language. We wanted to imitate this both sounds in the museum, unsuccessfully, by the way. And he made a distinction between the naive poet and according to German literary critics, he is, of course, obsessed with Goethe, and for him, the naive poet is Goethe. And with naive, he means someone who is natural, who is not self-possessed and self-indulgent, and whose mind is not busy the way he tells his story, the way he writes his poem. A naive poet would talk as if he is not upset about the ethical, political, philosophical consequences of what he or she is saying, just says, like a child, the truth that comes from perhaps outside. And this distinction is very romantic in the sense that Schiller always wanted to be naive, in the sense that you don't organize, plot, manage, develop, explore the potentials of the story. It just comes to you. It just comes to you. In fact, in the book, I also made reference to the way Coleridge writes about how he wrote his Kubla Khan, as if he is possessed by something coming from air, a subject that I also explored in my novel Snow, because the character is Snow. So there is the poet or the writer, and in fact, yes, Umberto, I also look at it that way, the reader, who is not concerned with the techniques, methods, hidden structures, mysteries of what a literary text is just writing it. And then there is what Schiller refers to as modern sensibility, the person whose mind is busy with how he is telling a story. In fact, and Schiller doesn't like that. He wants to be natural, naive, and is jealous of Goethe for just letting the story come out of his mind, so to speak. This distinction stayed with me for many years. In fact, I made a modern one that we all drive cars, right? Most of us. That a modern, the distinction can be applied to car driving. If we are a naive reader, in the end, we just drive a car and we think something else. We are not self-conscious. Now I'm changing to the fourth gear. We don't say that. We just naturally change as if it comes from God, because we have learned it. We are natural with it. While self-possessed novelist or poet, and in fact reader, is busy, is always categorizing, saying, is this right? Am I self-conscious? I don't want to be self-conscious about my self-consciousness, so forth and so on. I argue in my naive and sentimental, the naive and the sentimental novelists, that yes, we both we novelists write both naively and also sentimentally, saying that sometimes, yes, maybe I'm referring to myself, I feel, in fact, psychologically, I prepare myself. This should be my naive day. I should write without knowing what it's all about, the poetic sections of my book. And I really postpone writing execution of that chapter when I'm in a more manic and narcissistic mood. While in other moods, in the sentimental mood, I edit out, calculate the effect on the reader. And here I am very guilty. I am calculating everything, and what I do then, I hope that what I do then is not transparent. In the book, in this book, which were delivered as Norton lectures, which Umberto did some years before me, I put everything that I have lived and experienced as a novelist, and making it sure that a novelist and a both the novelist and the novel reader has two qualities in his or her mind, that we simultaneously think, read, or write naively and sentimentally. At least one part of it is sometimes completely naive as a reader or as a writer, but then there is the other side of us taking care. And also, I also warn the writers to keep away from completely naive readers who believe everything, who think that your book is autobiographical, and completely sentimental readers who are so self-conscious and cynical that only see the structures or the bones of the story. More or less, this is a little summary of my thoughts on the whole huge subject.
Okay. Yes, Patrizia put forth at least three main themes. One is fiction and reality, the other is Liszt, and the third one is naive and sentimental. So let now tackle with the third one. Yes, in another way, I was concerned with these two-level possibilities of reading a text, more from the point of view of the reader than from the point of view of the author. And to explain it better, or at least to explain better my point of view, as an homage to Istanbul, to the Pera Palace, I will make an example from a book of Agatha Christie, The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. You know, that is a very peculiar story in which the reader, as every reader of a detection novel, wants to know who is the culprit, who is the guilty one. At the end, Poirot says it's you, and you is the narrator. The guilty one is the one who is telling the story. So the, call it naive or first level reader is taken by this sudden revelation. It's bouleversé completely. But the narrator says that I was not lying. If you reread attentively my story, you will see that I confessed everything. Simply, you didn't pay attention, because at that point I said, I made exactly what I had to do. It was the crime. I committed the crime, so I said it. And the reader is obliged to climb upon the second level and to reread the novel to see how the plot was organized, how the style was concocted, so to provoke this uncertainty by concealing the truth that was so given in an open way to the reader. And that was the second level reading that concerns not so much the surprise of the discovery of the criminal story, but the aesthetic appreciation of the skill of the author. Or both Orhan and me, in different situations, we have been fascinated by the problem why people weeps about the fate of Anna Karenina, and I think that he's preparing a new courses in New York about...
I told you that I teach Anna Karenina in my class, but we are not worried that she's crying, Umberto. We take it natural. We are not sorry that she's dead, or we are not crying. Or if we cry,
anyway,
we take it naturally.
The real problem is, why are we crying or weeping about a character that you positively know it's fictional, he doesn't exist? I come back to the double level of reading, and I call the authority of a colleague of us that I know even Orhan likes very much, Aristotle. And Aristotle speaks of catharsis. You know, at the end of the tragedy, you are suffering pity and terror as the character do, and you participate in their passion. But there are two possible interpretations of catharsis. The one is the homeopathic one. You are really suffering the passions of the character. So I, like in a sort of voodoo, of candomblé, or trance, and you are, and I think that it was the real idea of Aristotle. The catharsis was a profound emotional involvement more in order to purify ourselves. But there is also the allopathic interpretation that it is not excluded by the text of Aristotle. The passions are represented in such a way that you can keep a distance from them. And you are not suffering them, but you are looking at them. And then it is a second level reading. So you can be a naive reader of Anna Karenina and to weep. When you become a second level reader, you don't cry any longer, but you admire the way in which the author succeeded in making you to cry.
But on the other hand, I argue, Umberto, that these our minds, our minds are constituted in such a way that we are aware of the first level. We find it so funny and to be naive. Wow, look at these readers are crying at Anna Karenina's death. They're naive readers. And we keep this information. We make a sort of a Pierre Bourdieu kind of distinction. We are, sophisticated readers. We don't cry at Anna Karenina. We only want to understand why others are crying at Anna Karenina's death. But on the other hand, I argue that the art of the novel works on human mind's capacity to sustain, and for quite a long time, contradictory thoughts and sentiments simultaneously. When we read a novel, our minds do so many things. But if we check the reality of the thing, or we are sometimes jealous. Oh, what a creative writer this Umberto is. Then we are also worried about what is this all about? What is this book about? Borges wrote an introduction to Herman Melville's Moby Dick, and he says, at the beginning you think this is a realistic novel, then you think this is a Dostoevsky novel, then you think, oh, this is a novel about the nature of cosmos, what's happening, what life is all about. I argue that we do many things, and our minds are capable of developing these sentiments simultaneously. One part of our mind is making fun of the naive reader who is crying and crying, and then another part of our is trying to hide that we are also involved in these sentiments. I argue that the art of the novel, which marginalized all forms of literature in the last 150 years, its power is based on this unique particularity that it addresses human mind's capacity to generate different sentiments, different logical thoughts that contradict each other. We, more or less, our attitude when we read a novel is to accept the reality of, let's say, Rabelaisian, Bakhtinian, many voices, and we give our sentiments, open our tentacles to the reality of the fiction. And then, yes.
No, since I am convinced that the majority of people in this world are stupid, which is a very important feeling to have in order to be ready to die. You know, when in the moment of my death, I am convinced that the totality of people are stupid, I can die. So step by step, every day you are to increase in your conviction that your neighbors are stupid. But since at this moment of my life, I think that only the 50% of that. So we have two kinds of stupids. One, they are aesthetically, intellectually stupid, who believes that the only possible reading is the second level one.
Yes.
They don't understand people that cry,
Yes.
and they are stupid. Okay.
But
To read aesthetically a book or to watch aesthetically a film, you have to participate also the first level emotions. There was a friend of mine who said, every time in a movie I see a flag to float independently of the nation, I cry. And I followed many friends of mine, very cynical intellectuals, that at the end of Cyrano de Bergerac, they were crying. You can be as cynical as you want, but Rostand produced his machine in order to make you cry at the end, and you cry. And if you don't cry, you are not able to aesthetically evaluate. So there is the high-level stupid who wants to cultivate only the aesthetic level, and the lower level stupid who follows only the once they know who is the culprit. Okay, they close the book, or they believe that Kemal is.
But Umberto, I read novels to be stupid sometimes.
Oh yes, we need it sometimes, but we are smart enough to.
I want to ask you something on this. Okay, the naive reader is naive, and so he assumes that you are Kemal and asks you, you are Kemal, and you say, ha ha, he was a naive.
No, you can't say ha ha ha. You have to say yes, but don't tell anyone.
Because you play quite heavily on this confusion.
Yes.
You play
Look, I argue that writing novels is deliberately investing in this distinction. You know that they will say, are you Kemal? And you know how many times you make it sure that this is a novel, this is artificial, I'm not Kemal. Again, you want them to believe that you are Kemal. You want them to believe that you're Kemal, although you also know how your novel operates in the second level.
But you have continually to provide cues in order to encourage them to understand you are not Kemal.
Yes, sure.
And you are lying. So you have to
yes, that's
treat,
also cheating. That's cheating.
That is meta-narrative.
Guarantee yourself against the critics.
Umberto Eco did something very cheating in his autobiographic novel, The Mysterious Flame of...
which is not autobiographical, obviously. Which is
not
autobiographical.
Patricia, you're telling all the secrets.
But I'm telling a secret. The book is full of list of objects, and the objects are almost all represented with images.
And I have all of them at home. Without paying for a museum, because I collected them from my childhood.
And you could open a museum. But there is one photograph, the one photograph that the main character looks of himself as a child. And this photo is a real photo of Umberto as a child, but nobody knows that. The reader does not know. So you, of course, you are not assuming that this is a shared knowledge of the reader, but if you choose that picture, that means something. I mean, you play in a kind of subtle
I didn't have any other photo.
Oh, you're cheating.
Okay, I had to be emotionally excited in order to. There's people who takes mescaline or heroin, and I have a photograph.
That's a good answer. Okay, but let's now shift to the aesthetic and sophisticated reader and ask a more technical literary technique. How do you both work with the question of point of view? You devoted quite a lot of thought of point of view in your book. Once somebody asked you, what is your identification? Maybe it was just a naive question, but you said with the adverbs, which is an interesting way also at a more sophisticated aesthetic level, because that means something about the construction of a point of view. So, would you explain?
I think that in the development of art of the novel in the 150 now almost 160, 70 years. Maybe let me put this information, my point about the development of art of the novel. I think humanity had found the art of the novel, what we read today as novels, 160, the generation of Balzac, Dickens. I think they formed in 1850s what we today use as a novel. And I think the main, really crucial development in 160 years is clarified by Henry James in his introduction to his novels. He was keen on point of view. And let me just, as if I am in Colombia, tell briefly what this is all about. That we read a story, but who's talking here? Who is describing objects? What's happening here? Henry James suggested that in his books, he always described a scene from some character in the story's point of view. This was not a something maneuver to reach catharsis, but this was something he thought will put his from whose point of view I should tell the story. He was perhaps a bit posing how he developed the idea of that particular novel. That once Henry James was self-conscious about point of view, then I think a theoretician in 1920s, 30s, I may be mistaken, Percy Lubbock,
Percy Lubbock, Craft of Fiction.
And there he wrote a masterful work highlighting Henry James. And after that, say if you read Simone de Beauvoir's memoirs, how she wrote one of her books, Sartre and I talked about that everything should be written from the point of view, one personage or whatever. Then later, and I am one of them, say inner monologue, stream of consciousness, telling the story as in Rashomon or Sound and Fury, or as in My Name is Red, and many other books, telling the story from the points of view of various characters, even as I did in My Name is Red, through the point of view of the objects, then orchestrating the whole narrative through the organization of the point of view. These are the issues that contributed to the development of the art of the novel. I think point of view is crucial. That, may I add something, or shall we come back? That is the enlargement or putting the subject and technical subject of point of view on a pedestal, also harmonious with the spirit, if we use the term right, spirit of the art of the novel, because in the end novels work because authors, writers do their best to identify with their characters. They may be autobiographical characters, then it's easy to identify. Then we write in such a manner that they are not autobiographical. We say, just because I'm wearing a red sweater doesn't mean I'm Umberto Eco. So we change the color of the sweater. We do this and write about ourselves in technically disguising ourselves. Or we do our best to identify people who are not like us, by sex, by class, by culture, but there are also limits to that. It's a cliche, eternal question of, art of writing. You're not a woman, how can you write the birth pains of a woman, And then you say, well, I didn't experience that, I'm mad, but, I'm very careful researcher, I research, and try to see that from through a person giving birth from the woman's point of view. So, point of view for me, for the development of my idea of the novel and for the history of the novel is, as you know, Umberto, very important.
Certainly, and since both of us have been charged to be postmodern,
don't tell anyone.
Even though I don't know exactly what does it mean, but in any case, we do are postmodern. I think that postmodern literature starts exactly with the development of this idea of the multiple points of view, and the masterpiece is the chapter 18 of Ulysses, in which the same scene is
Tristram Shandy.
But Tristram Shandy too, but is seen from 18 different point of view. But I would say that another feature of this development of novel, but you have practically dealt with it, is meta-narrativity, the way in which the narrator, so to speak, speaks of the novel he or she is on the verge of writing. He reaches the narcissistic exaggeration of putting himself as a character of his last novel. Okay, but you can have also a meta-narrative intrusion at the level of language and style. I had an experience of this kind when writing The Island of the Day Before, that takes place in the 17th century. And so I was obliged to adopt, or at least to make the characters to speak in a Baroque way. But I couldn't stand their Baroque style. I am not writing in Baroque, but they were speaking in Baroque. And so I was continuously obliged, so to speak, to apologize with my reader. Try to understand this speaking like that. It happens. And this is another way to establish this continuous dialogue between the author, the author with the narrator with the characters, and the narrator characters and the author with the reader, which is typical of after Henry James.
Yes, after modernity, which they say sometimes post-modernity. Also, it is also related, I think, to over-anxiety of writers who are burdened with the tradition of 19th century novel. So it's not classy, it's not highbrow to write another Zola novel in the form of 19th century Zola fiction. So you have to experiment to be prestigious, or you have to find new ways of telling stories. And then one part of it is also related to the fact that art of the novel, when it started, it was the common perception that it's something that the maids, novels are for the maids, for lower classes, for people who are not very well educated. Then the stature of the art or the stature of the novels went up. Now it's, yes, we have all these subgenres, but the literary novel is distinction now. It's highbrow. And the literary novels should prove herself to be making acrobatics about the ways of telling a story. And not only that, also showing his self-consciousness towards the critics and towards the readers, because the readers of literary novels are mostly intellectuals, students who are well informed. We are not writing pink novels, but we are busy writing literary novels. So all the levels that you described in your wonderful theoretical books, we writers, naive writers, should be also aware of it, so that clever readers like you would not accuse of ourselves to be naive. So there is also that kind of playfulness. Another thing, since I write history, maybe we'll go to that further, that when you write a historical novel, you know that there should that you want to let the reader know that you are well aware of the artificiality of the whole thing. In fact, what Bertolt Brecht taught us, more or less, the epic theater is what I'm doing in my novels, that there's always a character talking to the reader, a narcissistic me or a loud narcissistic character talking to the reader, saying that this is artificial. I think in my novels it has two purposes. Warning the reader, just be smart, this is artificial work, but I am like a trickster, showing you my tricks, and as you try to learn, I do another one, you're confused, and you follow, and I like that. And Umberto does it very well too.
I was going to ask you if you can define how you feel yourself a postmodernist novels.
I would like to come to the problem of lists.
Okay. No, just to finish this topic, I think, yes, in my opinion, you are postmodernist precisely because of this self-reflective awareness that nobody can not to have, I think, nowadays. Just before the list, I wanted to ask you something to Umberto about history. I mean, is a historical novel. Would you consider most of your novels historical novels, or would you define them somewhere else?
No. Some of my novels, like The Name of the Rose and Baudolin, are historical novels, and even the Prague Cemetery, since it takes place in the 19th century, is historical novel. Why? Well, because I like that, and probably also because I don't want to become too much emotionally involved in what I am telling, and so I prefer to speak of something which is far from me. Is a sort of, I could never tell a love story as he did with Fusung, because I am afraid of telling something very, very private, and so I prefer to speak of Napoleon. Okay. It's due to racial reasons,
But it's fiction, Umberto.
We are
it's
people.
Fiction. It's fiction. You can use fiction as a shield.
It's not only that. That the Pope the family of the new Pope was born in a village in Piedmont, my region. It seems that they arrived there, 50 cameras with journalists, and found the old descendant of the family. And they said, "It's true that you are the only cousin of the Pope?" He said, "Oh, no." "But it's true that your family has been also in touch with the family?" "Oh, no." And that was all. That was all. They were unable to express personal feelings, so they have defeated the entire press by refusing to give an answer. So that if they had to tell a story, they would write an historical novel. Yes.
Well, Umberto, your answer looks like those people who say, "Oh, I never read novels because they're all imaginary and personal." I think that, in fact, that novels are invented to tell personal stories disguised as objective. I think you can go. I think you can tell every private thing and attribute to your characters. In fact, I also the problem with writing novel. The problem for me in writing novels that I cannot find anything that's not personal in it. But of course, I do my best to hide my personal sentiments, and I argue in this book that, in fact, what the novelist's signature is about personal sensations. Say we read Hemingway, he is so good in giving us a sensation, how it feels when you drink a coffee. How it feels when you wake up in the morning and walk in the empty streets and feel the sound, the smell of the early morning rain in a spring day. Then you think you like the novelist because of these very particular sensations, which I argue in this book constitute the signature of the author. Whether it's a historical novel or whether it's a science fiction story doesn't really is not very important. In the end, even if you write a historical novel or a science fiction, the writer with a signature, like you, always talks about himself.
Okay, I have not said that I don't put personal feelings or memories in my novel. I say that I conceal them. And once I was asked what is the most autobiographical aspect of your novel, and I answer the adverbs, which is very important.
Well, probably the main difference is the level of concealment.
Yes.
He conceals much more than you do. But about sensations, I think there is a difference in here because the way you describe and use objects, let alone the real museum, but is very much linked to this reproducing the sensation, the words of sensation and perception. While for you, list and object, I don't know, they have, it seems to me, quite a different touch.
Okay, I agree what you have said about lists. In general, the difference between lists and collection. I know many collectors that when they have finished to perform their collection, they don't need anything, that they sell the collection because they are no more interested in, and they start a new collection or something else. While in list there is the possible infinity. It's not by chance that in the Museum of Orhan there are empty drawers. So he wants to continue for some decades more. I think that we had some observations about the first example of list in Homer, in which on one side you have the shield of Achilles, which is the description of a perfect and accomplished form, because he knew exactly what it had to be represented. And then when he wanted to represent the immensity of the Greek army from the point of view of Trojans, he made the list of the ships, because he was incapable to give a form to what was happening. Okay, and that is really the reason why we make lists, because we feel impossible in this moment to give a final form to what you call the instants of time, to finish the entire
infinity, you mean? Infinity.
But there is another reason you didn't mention, and people doesn't mention. I want to know if Orhan thinks so. Is the musicality. I think that you read sometimes some of your lists in order to listen the music,
yes.
The music which is the variation, the music which is the riff in jazz, the music which is a certain rhythm of a list, and sometimes you write lists only because of their sound.
Okay, we novelists use, and Umberto and I are the kind of novelists who are occupied with this. There are so many reasons for that. First, perhaps because of our education, that for me, that going to school is memorizing some lists. Turkey's cities, capitals of the countries.
The football team.
This was education. Then, as with my brother, we used to collect, as I exhibited some of them, pictures of footballers or movie stars, and they were numbered, and you have to collect 100 of them. Lists are essential for the kind of novelist, but I am, and Umberto is, there are personal motivations, but then there is a very humane side in me, which Umberto refers to as poetry of the lists. That there are the objective infinite lists, you collect, and in fact, I did collect all the matchboxes that Turkish companies produced in the years that covered the Museum of Innocence between 1974 to 19, I now forget when my book ended, 1983. And they were, and I tried to put them in the museum, and they didn't look nice. So I hid them. They are in my home. Here, that desire to exhaust all the elements in the list is a collector's habit. and it has something to do with possessing the world in a way that, and this kind of collector is, as you pointed out very cleverly, is always male. He wants to possess and control the world, and the world is composed of lists, and a child who is educated by the educational system I had in Turkey looks at the world as lists. The things I want to achieve in life, I still do. The novels, I put them together, the novels I want to write. You know, I want to write this novel, that novel, this novel, that novel, this novel. Oh, well, how am I going to write all this? Or, as I start to write a novel, then I make a list of what are the subjects I actually want to go into. I don't write a novel thinking a girl falls in love with a boy, but the boy goes to the military service and something happens. That's not how I look. I look at, I want to talk about this, I want to talk about blue microphones, I want to talk about this plastic thing, I want to talk about how Hemingway, you know, something like how it feels when you walk early in the morning after the rain. I want to talk about this, I want to talk about my angers, this or that. Then I write them down, then I look at the list and say, okay, now I have to have a story that connects all the elements in a list. The logic of Museum of Innocence as a novel is, in fact, it all started with the Museum of Innocence as a novel, started with the idea of forming a real museum. Maybe I tell them that there is a real museum, you can come, you know, it's in Çukurcuma. And then making an annotated catalog of that museum in such a way that the annotations are manipulated in such a way that it reads like a novel. Perhaps something in the form, I thought it would be like Nabokov's Pale Fire, which is a commentary line by line. Also it influenced Oğuz Atay's Tutunamayanlar. That if I manage to talk about the objects that my character Kemal collected, which I was also collecting, then talk about each object in such a way that the series of objects would form a novel. Here my point is that in the end we can reduce a novel to a structure in which there are things, sentiments, impressions, stories, images, anger, sentiments we want to talk about, but we need some strong body, a tree to hold on to these wonderful, what Nabokov calls nerve endings that constitute a whole. We have a sentiment to put everything together. Then we look for a story. In fact, the story never comes. You know, objects suggest that story.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think, well, Umberto was talking of the poetry of Liszt in the term of musicality, because I think you have in mind list of words, even if words refer.
I have in mind one of the chapters of his museum, in which in the Italian translation is a volte,
Baza,
sometimes.
My Italian is improving.
Sometimes there are 4 or 5 pages of this list, and you are not strictly interested on all the elements that are listed, but on the chant, on the music of these. That's why I call jazz. Jazz.
You're really interested also on the materiality of the object that reminds you of the same perceptive experience. I think this relationship with the world of senses is very, very important in your world, in your poetic world, and it seems to me that the everyday objects can become so important because they are at the same time so everyday but so universal, and then they can reach a kind of collective memory, something that we all share in terms of everyday sensorial experience of the world. That was my impression.
So more or less my museum can, simplified in a nutshell, can be summed up that I am exhibiting Proust's Madeleines, but my Madeleines are in the shape of cigarette butts, and a glass and a salt shaker. The way my character, my protagonist Kemal, is behaving towards the objects is, in fact, although he never confesses that he read Proust, is that he is treating the objects he gathered. I make it clear in my Museum of Innocence that there is a distinction between gathered objects and a collection. And what is the distinction? Gathered objects reach the level of a collection if they are exhibited in a museum with a story. Now, once I had the gathered objects, I said, wow, so I need a museum and a story. Since I'm a storyteller, that's easy. I wrote the story. The hardest part was to do the museum. But I also argue in the book that gathering objects is common to human heart every place, but a museum with that a place that exhibits objects with a story, whether it's a national history or this is the fire extinguisher, history of Istanbul fire extinguishers or whatever, that there should be always a story that links the objects. Even if you leave, a piece of cloth and leave 3 interesting objects, the human mind looks at them and generates a story that connects these objects. That I argue in the Museum of Innocence, that we link objects that are not familiar with us with a story. Objects always suggest a story, whether they are gathered objects, but you have to put them on a pedestal. We have to put them on a pedestal, the pedestal that is called a museum.
Well,
I think that in a good list, at the first glance, the object should appear as they had no connection with each other, like in Borges, the list of Borges. A good list should be made of unconnected objects. But if you read that at a certain moment, you discover what you call the secret center, the deep
thank you for
center of the book. I make you a personal example, since we are condemned here to speak either of our own books or the other friend books. So we have not many other chance except a quotation of Homer. And in my Foucault's Pendulum, the main character spends at least one night going around to the Conservatoire of Arts et Métiers in Paris and describing unconnected objects, because in a museum objects have no relationship with each other, and moreover the objects of a museum of technology are unknown to the reader, even to the narrator, and so he describes forms and forms. Why? But at the end we finally discover that the secret core of this list is the conspiration syndrome. Everything is suggesting you a universal conspiration, and you understand that this is a story of a paranoid hallucination. And so you have to play about the inconsistency, surface inconsistency of the list and the profound, deep consistency of the secret core of your story.
May I ask you a question, Umberto? That I'm always, my friends always accuse me of being a bit paranoid. And I argue, I have 2 cliche answers, that just because I'm paranoid doesn't mean that everyone is following, bad guys are following me. This is a common joke. But the other thing that, well, shouldn't I be a paranoid? Because I'm a novelist for almost more than 35 years. Then art of the novel is also has a paranoid side. There is, as I try to prove in the naive and sentimental novels, there is at the very heart of this structure a secret center, and a sort of a meaning emanates secretly, mysteriously from that. When we read a novel, we're always asking this. Oh, very good observation, what a clever writer, what a good rhetoric, what so forth and so on. But we always say, so but why am I reading this? What's the point? What's the center? What's the meaning? And then this makes us a bit slightly paranoid, because we are in a world, someone plotted something for us, we are sentimentally, by our sensations, in a world that someone constructed us to feel something. And then we are nervous if it's a good novel, if it's not Agatha Christie, you know, if it's not a novel with clues written in italics, then we are nervous. Where is it? Where will the dog bark? Where will the shot come? Meaning, not necessarily it's killing, but what's the meaning of it? It's beautiful, but what's it all about? And that and then we open our tentacles, and if you open our tentacles and perceptions too much, we get to be a bit paranoid. And writing a novel is also simultaneously identifying with yourself and identifying with the reader. So you read your novel, you write in a poetic, very naive way, then you read it again, wow, through the point of view of the reader, then you begin to plan that this text be paranoid. You are a great expert on paranoid literature. Maybe you'll tell us, clarify the subject better than I.
No, I think you are not obliged to be paranoid in order to tell paranoid stories.
Yes.
To represent one of my mottos is, Doctor, all the paranoids are persecuting me. So I am surrounded by paranoid people. It doesn't mean that I am not paranoid. I am denouncing the universal existence of the paranoid plot.
Well, maybe close to be the last very naive question. I'm not going to ask you how did you write your novel, because I already know the favorite answer of Umberto Eco, which is from left to right. So I will say that to you, but I ask you a slightly different version of the very naive question, which is why did you write novels to begin with?
Oh, really? Okay. Well, really, that I realized I wanted to be a painter between the ages of 7 and 22. I am a sort of a black sheep in a family of engineers. Everyone studied engineering, mathematics. I lived in a very competitive family where uncles are catching you in a corner and asking mathematical questions. And I was intimidated by this precision. One reason, not only that. Then somehow, once I drew in high school or at home some drawings, and everyone said, "My God, this boy has talent," and I loved it. So I prepared myself for a painter's life till 20. Everyone was saying that Orhan will be a painter. And since I come from a family of engineers, I went to Istanbul Technical University, at least a concession that I will not be an engineer, but an architect. And it continued like this. But in the end, I thought that I will live a solitary life. I have seen in life that I don't want to get orders from superiors and give order to people who are below me. I want to live a solitary life of imaginative person. First, I thought it would be a painter. Then, this I explained in my Istanbul autobiographical book, which ends the moment that I decide not to be a painter, but a writer, that I realized that for some reason, I cannot be a painter. Why don't I be a novelist, I said to myself. Maybe that may be a fun life. And the day I said I won't be a painter, but I will be a novelist, is when I was 22. In the end, most people say, I am a writer because I have things to say. It's honestly, the things that I wanted to say came later. I wanted to be a writer because I wanted to live alone in a room. And I'm very happy that I managed to do that. Managed to generate the interest of some readers. I'm so happy that you are even here to listen to us. Mm-hmm.
Well, an alternative could have been a life prisoner without money, but
yeah,
you would have lived alone.
But of course, it's human vanity. You need some recognition. Okay. You need someone to kiss you and say, "Orhan, your painting is nice today. Your sentence is good." So that's why you also publish and show it to others, which is always damning.
No, I have two kinds of answers. One in order to frustrate the person who asks a stupid question because they have to be frustrated and humiliated. And so I say some people are pedophiles, some others make bank robberies, some others climb upon the Mont Blanc. I write novels. So, we have not discussed the personal preferences of people. But the other one should interest you as a semiotician, because you know that, well, according to many researchers of the last decades, we know that every form of knowledge, even definitions, are structured under the form of a narration. So narrativity is not only a category that rules novels and stories, but every form of knowledge. And so I practiced narrativity all along my life. When I was a child, writing stories. Then I discovered that I had no talent for writing novels, and I stopped. But when I presented my doctoral dissertation, one of the professors, the one that afterwards published my dissertation, so his criticism was a benevolent one, he says, but you know, you are not ripe enough, because the real scholar makes a research, and this research involves many errors and trial and errors. You make an hypothesis, then you refuse it, then you try another hypothesis, and you reach your conclusions. But you are a real scholar. At the end, your book, your dissertation should be the conclusions. On the contrary, you have told the story of your research as it were a detection novel. I recognize that he was true in depicting my thesis like that, but he was wrong in believing that it was a flow. I decide that every scholarly research should be constructed and organized as a detection novel. So all along my life, I wrote detection novels, disguised as philosophical research, until the moment I decided, since I had nothing better to do, to write a real detection novel. That was all.
Well, I think you are lying, because I can absolutely assure you, if you read the theory of semiotics, it's much less fun than the name of the rose, but in the less narrative.
There are novels that are not necessarily fun.
No, I know.
I've never finished the Vanity Fair, for instance, because I don't find it so fun.
Well, just maybe to conclude, why don't you ask each other a question? Something you always wanted to know.
But we are not. You didn't tell me that you were going to ask this question yesterday.
Just
Okay. This is since this is an unprepared question, I'm taking my time to think about it. One part of mine is busy with what kind of surprise question I can ask to Umberto. For example, is it coincidental that the color of this cloth and the color of your sweater is the same? I have many interest in color.
This is a paranoid question.
Yes. But the fact that the mind that generates a fiction is the mind that finds connection with unconnected things. In fact, a suggestive novel, in the end, is a novel of a person who has the mind of, who is asking irrelevant questions. But if we ask obviously clarified, logically amplified questions that has so much reason that the reason puts it on a pedestal, then that's not a good novel. But if we write a novel and one part of our body, our spirit or our mind knows that why we are not sure why we are writing it, that I always feel is a good novel. The question I should ask to Umberto, I will evade that, but I should make a statement. I am so happy he is here. He is a great writer. I am grateful that this conversation is organized, that I have learned so much from him. I should express my gratitude to him. He is a great writer, and this had been a great conversation and opportunity for me.
I cannot. I cannot repeat what he said because it would be mere plagiarism. And so
Thank you all of you, and thank to Orhan and Umberto for this wonderful conversation. And
we have not liquidated the problem of fiction and reality. So you have to organize a new meeting for next year. Okay. Or we have an appointment in Bologna.
Yes.
Okay.
Next year I'll go to Bologna to do the same kind of thing. Yes. Thank you so much for coming.